in Christ. So anyways, that's what stuck out to me.
Great. I have some bad news. My bad news is I forgot to hit record when we started again. So there was a lot that wasn't recorded, or what we've done since then. So for Mom and for Lindsay, if they watch it, that's, oh well. It was mostly just reading. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Anybody else? Thanks, Kristen, for that. Something that stuck out to me. I mean, I've read it many times before, but something that maybe I know that stuck out more this time is this he specifically calls attention to the Gentiles twice in reference to you Gentiles in I think chapter 2, and then again in chapter 3, the beginning I think of chapter 3 and 2 verse 11. So that's interesting. Just an interesting, as we begin to do some more observation and interpretation, like who Paul is actually specifically speaking to here. Like, and what is the church that in Ephesus, or the saints in Ephesus, what do they consist of mainly, and what would be their struggles? I'm kind of like Kristen was saying, like because Paul is talking about being one, like what does that mean for the church in Ephesus and what they're going through? Anybody else want to share some thoughts?
I just, like when we read through it last night, I just wrote down like words that I thought, or ideas that came up a lot, just to kind of keep in the back of my mind. Like, and I'll just kind of read from my list. It's nothing profound, but it's just like, I feel like children came up a lot, like son and daughtership. And then mystery was like said several times, grace, strength. And then I thought it was interesting, you know, it was towards the end of the chapter or end of the book, where there was a large discussion about what do you do in different roles, like parents and children, husbands and wives, bondservants and masters. So I think that, you know, what do we do in our relationships? So I thought that was interesting. And then I noticed wrath and anger mentioned several times. That probably just stood out to me because I had a day where I had a lot of impatience. So I just was like, oh, there's that wrath again. But anyway, so it was just interesting to read through a whole book at once and think of what are the words that I've heard several times. I'm excited to see how those tie together. That's all.
Yeah, those are good. Those are really good observations. Since you said that, we're going to go right into starting some examples of the color code, especially for people that haven't done it before. And I would say I'm probably not the greatest example of a normal color code, because I overcode. Like I overcolor, and not over, but it's really up to you. The purpose of it is really to get you to slow down, to really observe, like what is the main message of what Paul is saying. So we look at things like, I'm going to give you a list. I'm going to send it to you as well. I typed it up in an email. I also typed up what an epistle in the first century looks like and how it's structured, with like the structure of like how it's broken up in this letter. We're not going to go into detail of that, but it is confusing to some people. Like Paul is saying, when he starts out saying Paul, that's how they would write a letter, instead of writing it and at the end saying sincerely or in Christ Paul. It's just said they say their names at the beginning. Then obviously the two, but you'll see in the email I'm going to send you of the handout for today, that it gives a little bit more detail, maybe helps understand some of this would be a typical letter that people would receive in that time frame in the Roman Empire area. So for the color code, like I said, I tend to maybe over color code, but it's really up to you and how much you want to do. What I'm going to ask, especially, it's not a long book, but there can be there's a lot of options. I gave you that key. You won't use everything in this book. I don't. I will let you know what to look for. Okay, so I'm going to give you like a brief, not a brief, but like a list of just general throughout the letter things to look for. So first off, you're gonna want to look for themes. So I'll just give you a freebie. Unity is a theme in this letter. So what I do for unity, Well, for starters, for those of you who haven't done the color code before, you're going to want to use colored pencils work the best because they're sharper, and so it's easier, especially in your Bible if that's what you're using. But I do different things. I didn't bring my little sheet with me, but like I would use.
Do you want me to grab mine so I can show what it looks like?
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, okay, keep talking and I'll grab mine so I can show it up.
Okay. So I just use that color code key, and I either highlight if I'm just gonna highlight the word or whatever it is. I use that as my key. Does that make sense? Like I don't always highlight everything. Sometimes I underline it instead as a different color or a different code, a different type thing I'm coding. Is this making sense? So for example, sorry, I should have brought my sheet. I don't know what I was thinking. For example, like Shelby has hers like that too, if you can see it. So like, see, Kristen does some boxes, or she does some like, can you lift it up a little bit? She does like these little greater than, less than signs around things as well. So what I would do is I would decide some of the ones that we're going to use this time and pick out the color and what kind of thing you want to do. Circle it, underline it. I do some boxes. And Kristen is showing you her beautiful Philippians right there. Thank you.
Well, I'm just showing so that people know kind of like what it looks like. I know that it was really helpful for us when we did this and we started out to kind of give us like a jumping off point to say like, let's just focus on, certain things. I know that you gave us like 1, 2, 3, 4, like certain ones to actually.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Well, I know. I'm just showing them what it kind of looks like. So anyways, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll let you know, I'll give you a list here. Is that making sense? Like what we just kind of tag team to say to you? I see you, Liz, laughing. By the way, side note, Liz is going to be here this weekend, which is super exciting. I'm so excited.
I'm excited. I'm excited to see you.
Yeah.
Did you see the thing on Facebook? It's been a year now.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're gonna get started with the color code. So the list of things is, like I mentioned, unity, and how I code that is, I'll just show you in my here. It's very light because for some reason I did it in pink, which was not the greatest color to choose. But I do, if it's like, okay, this whole paragraph here is talking about unity, you can barely see it. And I do like a bracket around the whole paragraph. See at the right, this side where my right hand is, I do like a bracket, and then on the outside, I write unity. Does that make sense? Or yes. Sometimes people do like little squiggly things. So that's one that you'll want to maybe look at. Anytime Paul is mentioning it, he doesn't have to say unity, but anytime he's alluding to unity, words like one or that kind of thing, like bringing Gentiles and Jews together as one body of Christ. So that's the unity. And then I'm also going to send you all of this in an email. So if you don't want to write it down, then that's fine. And they will also have examples. So then repeated words, ideas, and themes. I use the same for all of that. I use the same color for repeated words, themes, and ideas. And so we'll go through that we'll go through chapter 1 for repeated ideas, themes, and words in just a minute. Whose, so the whose can be groups of people. For example, he says Gentiles, he says sons of disobedience, he says saints. Those are groups of people. Then proper nouns. Paul, he mentions Tychicus in here at the end. I would not do Jesus, because you're going to be highlighting the whole thing. So we know this is about Jesus. Let's just accept that. It's about God, So anything that refers to someone in the Trinity, we got it. We know that they're in here. We're good. So more like other people. And then also, you can do pronouns if you feel like they're important. And I would say there are a few in here that are, and I will give you just a little bit of, I would say in 1 verse 19, it mentions his a few times, or him, I would say his. It's 18 and 1:18 and 19. It says his glorious inheritance, his power, his great might. I think those are good. Those are pronouns that are going to be helpful for interpretation. And like I said, for proper names, only do it one time if it's mentioned. Though he does mention Gentiles multiple times. If you want to, that's important in here. So if you want to do that multiple times, that's fine. But it's just like, you know, if someone says the same name repeatedly, it's like, you know, it's about them. You don't have to keep highlighting. Okay. Moving on. Connectives. There is a brief description in the email that I'm sending about some of these things that may be a little bit confusing. Connectives, I'll just give you some examples. A connective is like a preposition or a prepositional phrase. If figures or parts of speech make sense to you. So I would say connectives are words like therefore, finally, there's like a prepositional phrase.
However.
For this reason. There's that a couple times. There's some so that's in there, and there's like a because or a for. You do not have to do everything. If you think it's important, then do it. You don't need to do every for that's in here, because you're going to be highlighting a lot. But if you want to, I mean, go ahead. The next one is when or time. I do that color code the same. So when would be more like a general time. So that'd be like in verse 4 in chapter 1, it says before. And then in 13, it says when. Those are more general. Then but before that, in verse 10, he says fullness of time. That's more specific, I would say. And then it says like in this age, in the one to come, later on, those kind of things. Once, now, those are our time or when. Am I talking too fast? I just don't want to keep you guys for a long time. So if I'm like a speed talker right now, just unmute yourself and say, hey, slow down. But you are getting this in an email when we're done. So hopefully that my speed talking is not too fast. So the next one would be commands. And that would be, you're going to see that Kyle alluded to this when he gave his response. You're going to see that show up a lot more starting in chapter 4. And that's just imperative statements. So 4 verse 1, he says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. He says like a lot more specific, like directly, I guess, later on when he says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, speak the truth with his neighbor, be imitators of God, those kind of things. They're just imperative, directive commands. And then lists, that's a list of 3 or more things or like phrases. So that would be, there's one in 1 verse 18, it says having the eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which he has called you, what are the riches of his glorious inheritance, and what is the immeasurable greatness of his power toward us who believe. And for me, I don't highlight that whole thing because there may be other things within that I want to notice in a different way, like that I want to code as like a repeated word or something. So I do just little brackets around it instead of highlighting the whole thing or underlining the whole thing. And then lastly, almost last, we're illustrations, figures of speech. So that would be, does that make sense? So we're talking about metaphors and similes, things like that. This may be like, oh, I'm throwing in the towel now because I don't know what you're talking about. So I'll give you some examples. In 1 verse 18, he says, having the eyes of your hearts enlightened. Well, we don't actually have eyes on our hearts. That's a figure of speech. When he refers to Christ being the head of the body, or the church being the body, or being a temple, or the armor of God, those are all figures of speeches or illustrations. So that's good. And then there comparisons or contrasts. Comparisons usually start with like or as. Also, those are keys like signify. There's a comparison, and then contrasts are but, yet, nor, though, things like that. So that, and there's more examples in the handout I'm going to give you. I am like speed talking because I really wanted to get into some repeated words in chapter 1 real quickly because we have 10 minutes. Okay, there's one other additional thing that I'm going to talk about color coding. Then we're going to do at least the first two, or we're going to just try to get through verse 14 with just repeated words and keywords. And then I'm going to send you on your way. So I'm also going to tell you just by chapter what to focus on for your color code. I'm going to remind you that this is in the email, so if you don't want to write all this down, you can't. But that way, if you have questions, you can ask them now. So chapter 1, you're going to focus on repeated words and ideas and verb tense. Does verb tense make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? So you're going to see a lot of past tense verbs throughout chapter 1, starting at verse 3. Mostly all of it is going to be past tense, at least through verse 14. So so just look at, that's a focus. So why I'm telling you this is, if you feel like everything that I just mentioned is too much, you're like, I cannot do all of that, then I just want you to focus on the things that I mentioned to you, and at least do that for those chapters. So chapter 1, repeated ideas and words, verb tense. Chapter 2, contrasts. There's a big contrast in chapter 2. And how I do it is if you want to do a longer contrast, it's not just like right around the word but you can see the contrast throughout, like a paragraph or several verses. I highlight one part of the contrast with one color and then one with another to kind of distinguish that. If you want to do that, you don't have to. It's just an example or suggestion. Then chapter 3, focus on the who's, and that's there's several different ways that Paul describes people in that chapter. Chapter 4, commands. We kind of already went over that. Then chapter 5, Millie mentioned it when she gave a little bit of a response after we read who's, and that goes shortly into chapter 6. And then chapter 6, it's mostly, the end of chapter 6 is mostly an illustration. So just kind of look at that, focus on that in your color code there. And yeah, so that's for next week. And like I said, the email that I'm sending you when we're done now will give you more, like, the detailed instructions and some examples. So I know we have 6 minutes and 30 seconds before this shuts off again, and I know we're like 10 minutes over. Are we good to do like 2 paragraphs of repeated words and then go? Is everybody on board with that?
Hey, Melinda. Yes, we're on board with that, but I also just want to quickly mention, Kyle and I both have Zoom Pro accounts through our job. So if you want us to make a meeting there so we don't get knocked off every 40 minutes, we could do that for the next time.
Yeah, that would be super
cool.
awesome.
Then we could go for hours. Not that we would, but we could. So, okay.
I'm game. So that's awesome. So we're just going to quickly go through, we're just going to do repeated words, themes, and ideas in 1 through verse 14 today, and then I'll let you take off with it. And I just want to remind you, if you have questions, feel free to ask me. Send me an email or a Facebook message or a text message or whatever if you have questions, or ask somebody that's already done some color coding. Or if you live around people together, then do it, and you can do it want to do it together. That's great too. To learn from each other and see what other people notice that you might not. That's totally fine. But if you need help or you have a question, feel free to ask somebody. So we're going to start with, I'm not going to read through this because it's going to take way longer than 4 minutes and 45 seconds. So we're just going to, I'm just going to ask, did anybody, repeated words are at least 3 times, either throughout the letter or within a paragraph. So did anything stick out as repeated in this first, anywhere in that first page and a little bit on the second page?
The first word I noticed was blessed or blessing.
Yep. So good, great, Cleo. And I'm going to let you tell us where those are. But it doesn't have to be the exact word. It just a form of the word. So blessed, blessing, that blesses, that all counts as the one word. So Cleo, do you want to go ahead and
So you see it in verse 3 times.
Mhm.
Then again in verse 6.
Yep.
And I think that was it for the first.
Yeah, that's good. Yep. There 4 times. Great. Anybody else? Anything else?
How Lisa Jewell had mentioned the will
Right.
of God, or the will. I see that a couple of times here. Just like will, do you want me to just go through where that's at?
Yeah, will. I would just do will, his will, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so verse 1, will of God.
Mhm.
And then it was, where did I just see it? Of his will in verse 5.
Mhm.
Verse 9 as well.
Yeah. Right. And then it's in verse 11. And
Yep.
I think that's it for right now. We'll probably see it the more you'll see it further on. So just remember that as you're going through, because it's a big theme throughout the whole book. So we have blessed, we have will. Anybody else?
So Melinda, just to clarify,
Yeah.
this is all the same. You're using this one color as the key, as the repeated word. So all of these words we're talking about would be, if you chose green for key ideas, themes, repeated words, you're doing all of these in green.
Yeah, yep, they're all in green. Well, mine are blue, but yes. So Shelby? Oh. Anybody else?
Me.
Oh, go
Grace.
ahead.
Grace.
Sorry, what? Grace. Yes.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how many times we see it right here, but it is a repeated word throughout the book. So I think it's just here. Oh
I
no,
think maybe 3 times, do you think?
maybe Grace there. Grace.
I see 3 for sure. I think that's it.
Okay,
Maybe
where do you want to just
in
start out with
2, of course.
Mhm.
And then in 6.
Yep.
And 7.
Oh, I didn't see 7. Great. You'll see that throughout as well. Yep, good. And peace is a big theme. You don't see it much here, but except for the second verse, but we'll see it a lot in chapter 2. So if you want to mark that one there. And then I'm going to give you one other one. No, there's a couple other ones. There's a couple little like phrases that I'm going to give you real quick. Does anybody else have anything else to add to that? Any other thoughts?
I had marked inheritance and predestined, but they're only done twice. They were just repeated at that.
I thought inheritance was 3 times. Oh, it's back. It's further down. Inheritance is again in the next one. So you can go ahead and mark that as a repeated word because it's in the next paragraph that we're not going to get into right now. So yeah, inheritance. You can do predestined. I think it's only twice. And I would mark it as a verb tense instead, but you can do it as repeated if you like.
We're
okay.
about out, so give us the phrases. We're about out.
Kristen. The phrases are in or through Christ or him. So you see that a lot. Yeah, we're about out. Do you mind jumping back on real quick and just finishing this? Is that fine with everybody? Sorry, I know it's